Welcome. If you're just joining us, we're going to give it another few seconds or a minute to let everyone be able to join us. Okay. Hello all, my name is Mimi Mudd, and I want to welcome you to the 2022 Spring Family Webinar Series. This is our second webinar of the series. Tonight, I'm joined by my colleague, Carolyn Herman, who's the Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. We are excited that you've chosen to join us for tonight's conversation about pre-health advising. We have a few pieces of information we want to share with you all before we get started. First, we want to make sure you all know how to submit questions during the webinar. You'll notice that you have a Q&A feature probably at the bottom of your screen. A professional staff member within Student Transitions and Family Programs is going to help field any questions you all submit through that feature. To make sure you know how to use that Q&A feature, please share the year in school your student currently is. This will also help Dean Herman tailor the information for tonight's audience. Second, we're going to ask you to keep an eye on the chat feature where we'll be sharing any applicable links and email addresses during the duration of the webinar. And finally, this webinar is going to be recorded, or it's currently being recorded live. Next week, it'll be uploaded to the families.wustl.edu website. In a moment, we'll hear from our panelist about pre-health advising. If something she says sparks a question, don't forget to send it to us in the Q&A feature. You can do that throughout the webinar. We'll hold the questions and then be able to ask them at the end. So talking about the Q&A feature, it looks like we have family members of students primarily from their first and second years, but we do have a mix of all students in attendance tonight. So that's great to see. Now, since I know you all want to hear more about pre-health advising, I will go ahead and turn it over to Carolyn to introduce herself before we begin our question and answer portion of the webinar.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Mimi. My name is Carolyn Herman, and I direct pre-health advising for the College of Arts and Sciences. And we also, because there are not very many students in Sam Fox or Olin who are planning on going to medical school, we also advise them as well. I have a colleague in engineering, Ron Lowy, who is, collaborates closely with me, but who oversees the advising for engineering students. But we've worked together a long time, so I can probably answer most engineering questions as well. I've been at Washington University a long time, and I love being here because the families send us such really lovely young people. It really is a privilege to work with young people who are so smart, but also like so caring and so dedicated to making an impact on the world and on individuals through health. And so it's just a really great job. I thought I would frame maybe, our session with a couple of, features or, characteristics, I think, of pre-health advising at Washington University. And the first is that everybody here can pursue absolutely any health profession that they want to. So really and truly, whether it's medicine or dentistry or, whatever your, child's end goal is, everybody here is smart enough to do that. And so our job as pre-health advisors is to help students strategize in how to build all the tools and skills they're going to need to be successful in that eventual graduate professional program. And when they have demonstrated they have those tools and skills, that's also what makes them successful in the application process. So our job is to help your students strategize how to get ready, and we enjoy doing that. And it can be a complex process. There are kind of a lot of things to think about. There are a lot of moving pieces. And that's why I think it is great to have experienced coaching on hand. So we're excited to be able to provide that. The other thing that I think a common misperception that I end up, kind of correcting for students and parents is, especially early on, maybe in the first year, maybe in the first 2 years, students often worry a lot about their grades, and they, we have a lot of, very ambitious students who are used to being at the very top of everything, or they probably wouldn't have ended up here. You don't need perfect grades at WashU to go to medical school. Our average of students who are admitted, our average science GPA is about 3.4. So you don't even have to have a 3.4 in the first semester of your first year. You have to build to at least a 3.4 by the time you're applying to be in a really comfortable position. So I think that's sometimes new information for families and for students. So I'd like to kind of put that out there early. I assume, though, most people joined this call because they actually had active questions. And so I want to make sure that we're attending to the participants' needs and answering their questions.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn, for being here tonight to answer those questions. I have a starter question. Is there anything else you want parents and families to know generally about pre-health advising?
So one question I also get a lot, especially since many of the families have younger students on this call, is when is my student going to get a pre-health advisor assigned? We typically make advisor assignments during the sophomore year, or at least that's the earliest we make pre-health advisor assignments. But if we have a fantastic website, actually, prehealth.wustl.edu. And we've got an advisor, meet our advisors tab on there that lists walk-in hours 4 of the 5 days a week. So hopefully there's something that works for everybody. And if really your students' class schedule, all their labs and stuff, precludes attendance at that, by all means, they should email pre-health and we'll find them a specific appointment time. So we are more than happy to engage with younger students. We just don't think they necessarily are benefit from a specific advisor assignment. We want them to, become at home here, develop a good relationship with their 4-year advisor before we start layering other advisor relationships on top of that.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to the questions submitted by our attendees, some pre-submitted and some during this, during the webinar so far. So that just a quick reminder to our parents and family members on the webinar, please submit your questions through the Q&A feature. So the next question has to do with following up on the information about advisors. So a family member has a student who is a sophomore and an English major, and they just began their pre-med track. They're wondering if they'll receive their pre-health advisor as a sophomore, even if they just began pursuing pre-med.
So that I would say they probably don't need a specific advisor yet, just because the curriculum is pretty standardized at the front end. But definitely if they have questions about things beyond coursework, I would, I hope they'll come to my walk-in hours, even this Thursday, every Thursday, 1 to 5. So I'd love to talk to any student who, we sent out a survey that if your student didn't get, they can also ask me about. And there were some sort of milestones for, this is how to tell whether you're really going to benefit from having an individual advisor at this point. So definitely students should come and talk to me if they think they're ready for an advisor, even if they didn't, sort of check all those boxes on the survey.
Great. Then some more follow-up questions about advisors. When and how often should students meet with their pre-health advisor?
That's a great question. So I think that is really generally driven by the student early on. I would love it if all of my pre-health advisees came to see me, at least a couple of times a semester so that I really get to know them. That will help me make suggestions for them, that will help me mentor them, that will help me guide them. But I have plenty of students who are very successful who are just too busy to come see another, just make another bunch of appointments. They're still figuring out their classes, figuring out their community engagement, trying to find clinical experience, trying to figure out their timeline. And they want to just get a few pieces in place before they come and meet with me regularly. And that can also work just fine. So I think to some degree, it is up, it's up to the student, and it's really about the student's style and what is going to benefit them.
Yeah. So we have a family member who has a sophomore student that submitted a form to request an advisor, and they're curious kind of what the response time is on that, when they could expect to hear back.
Yeah, we are a little short-handed with support staff in my office. I know that somebody is going to work on that, I think this week, if not next week. So I think that will be happening quite soon. But yes, advisor assignments are coming. Stay tuned.
Great. And then we just had a follow-up question about that. How many advisors are currently on your staff, would you say?
I have a team of probably about 10 right now. And we're getting ready to hire another full-time person whose primary role will be sort of attached to that.
Great. Okay, we had a parent or family member ask about the walk-in hours you mentioned in your intro. They're curious, where are those physically held? Or is it virtual? Is it in person?
Yeah, so I, for example, am happy. I hold my drop-in advising hours at a time when I am physically in the office. We're working from home one day a week, but I do my virtual hours on a day when I'm here. So, unless the roads are terrible and we're, all staying home to not kill ourselves on the ice, generally I am available either in person or virtually. And so there's a Zoom link on there, or you can physically come to couples too. I think at least one of the advisors doesn't have an office space currently, and is only virtual, but most people are available in either format.
Wonderful. And I'm sure that's indicated on the calendar invite, or they
Yeah.
make that clear to the student.
Yes.
So if students are trying to take a class, but it is currently full, can their pre-health advisor help them get into that course?
The only classes that fill up, that students honestly can't get into, are things that are electives, any of the sort of core actual requirements. I mean, nobody's going to be shut out of organic chemistry. That's just not going to happen. We're going to find you a seat. The department is going to make sure you have a seat in any class that is absolutely essential. So if you were really hoping to take, biomedical ethics and it filled up this semester, that you may just have to wait a semester for.
Great, thank you. Okay, we had a parent or family member who had a question about whether or not there is a specific number of hours that students need of shadowing, clinical work, research, etc., in order to get into medical school. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely, I'm happy to speak to that. So I would say, so there's no set number of hours. It's not necessarily about seat time. It's about what you've learned from your experiences and how you can convey what you've learned, sort of the narrative you can create out of your experiences. That said, claiming that you learned a lot, with a very limited amount of exposure maybe isn't so credible. So I would say, first of all, that research, unless you're pursuing an MD, PhD, how much time you spend in research is very flexible. About 15% of our students who go to medical school do no research whatsoever. Now, they're doing lots of other interesting things. They are probably very higher than average on, community engagement types of activities, or in, maybe they have a paid job in a clinical setting. So it's not as though they're not doing anything, but they're doing different things than research, and that can be absolutely fine. For students who are aiming for MD, PhD, they need to they need to have enough experience in research to show maturity as a scientist. They want to, they want to be working fairly independently, at the bench, to some degree designing their own experiments. So that's going to be multiple semesters, probably some full-time summers of research. In terms of, but, for everybody else, the amount of research that you do is the amount that's right for you until you either learn that, what you wanted to get out of that. Either like, I really love this and I want to keep going in med school, but not enough that I want to do MD, PhD, or I'm really glad I had this opportunity, but I don't think I'm really going to do research as a physician. And so I'm going to shape my school list to reflect that. I'm going to focus more on schools that emphasize clinical training. So that I think is very variable and depends on what the student, wants to get out of their own education and what their goals are going forward. Clinical, I think, is the thing that has changed the most. So especially if there are families on this call who have older children or, nieces and nephews, family members, neighbors, whatever, that went to medical school 5 years ago, the expectations around the amount of clinical exposure have increased enormously post-pandemic. I don't have very many ways to investigate why that would be, but definitely empirically, it's a fact that students with otherwise exceptional credentials who I'm confident would have gotten in 5 years ago are sometimes being waitlisted now. So I am recommending that students have at least 300 hours of clinical experience before they apply. And that should be some combination, and I don't know that we have enough data to have a magic formula that's more precise than 300 hours, but it should be some combination of your own patient-facing experience. So where you have provided a service or interacted directly with patients, that might be in clinical research if you're taking histories or doing, follow-up work with patients. It might, or, helping to consent patients. It could be that you volunteer in a nursing home back home over the summer, but you do that, a good number of hours a week so that it's really a substantial experience. That could be that you get a part-time job as a transporter or a patient care tech, or you do some, you have family, friends, or friends of your family who, or your friends, high school friends have medical practices, and some of their, staff in the office will be on, on a family leave or taking vacation, and maybe you do some fill-in. So I think there are lots of ways that students can get that direct patient engagement, doing things that it's appropriate for them to get some fairly brief on the job training, and they'll be able to, do a good job and make a real contribution in those settings. So some direct patient-facing contact, and then some observation of, if we're talking about medical school, the physician role. If it's dental school, obviously the role of the dentist. So you want to know, not, if you volunteer a lot at a nursing home and you work with a lot of elderly patients, that's obviously a healthcare setting, and that's great information. But that says yes to why healthcare. It doesn't necessarily say how you know that physician is the right role on the healthcare team for you to play. So you do have to have some shadowing or scribing or something where you're also observing the physician role and can speak to why that's the best place for you to make your contribution.
Thank you. So when it comes to those types of opportunities, internships, clinical experience, et cetera, what supports are available at WashU to help students find those?
We do have, the Career Center certainly works with students in all, aspirations for post-WashU life to figure out what kinds of summer opportunities. They have some listings of, job opportunities. And so that's certainly a resource to check into, and, meeting with a career advisor, I think, can be a good idea. A lot of students volunteer during the school year here through student groups even, there's something called Einstein Explorers where kids go and do like science demonstrations or science activities at the bedside in Children's Hospital with kids that are too ill, probably even to go down to the playroom. And, that can be a very isolating experience and also like a developmentally limiting experience, right? Children should be learning and growing during that time, and you don't get so much stimulation in a hospital bed. So there are student groups that are doing things clinically. There are lots of, sort of standardized volunteer opportunities through the hospitals around here. At home, they should absolutely check into, what are the volunteer opportunities at their local, not only hospitals, but also does your local maybe YMCA have a camp for diabetic kids, diabetic adolescents who are learning to manage their own, eating and sugar levels more independently. And if there's something like that, can you volunteer at it? That would be a fantastic exposure. Also, every community has nursing homes that are very shorthanded right now.
Do you have specific advice for students wanting to get research positions? And a follow-up to that, how heavily is GPA considered for those opportunities?
So I always send students to the undergraduate research office's website. They have a fabulous Getting Started tab that has all kinds of, great sort of advice, thinking through, some pre-research reflection to help you be more efficient in searching for those research opportunities. But they also are very open to meeting with students individually. So yes, I think the fact that only 15% of my students who went to medical school didn't do research, the flip side of that is 85% did. So it's obviously not something that's like super selective or that you have to be like amazingly entrepreneurial to, do here. Most students who want to do this, it's like, it is like looking for any other kind of job or opportunity, summer job, even at local businesses. You might have to, apply to more than one thing before you actually land a position. But if you keep at it, you're very likely to come up with something.
We received some additional questions kind of going back to pre-health advising. Mm-hmm. So the first one is, can first-year students attend the drop-in advising
Absolutely.
hours?
By all means. I speak to many first-year students in my drop-in, and I'm delighted to do so.
Great. And then where can students and or parents to send it to their students find the form to request a pre-health advisor?
I might need to, I don't think I have that at my fingertips because I'm on a different computer than I usually work at. So I might have to send that to you later, Mimi, for you to share with parents who've registered.
Yes, I can do that for sure. Great. Okay, now we're moving into some questions specific to gap year. So can students on a gap year still access advising and career services while applying to medical school?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We want students to apply on the timeline that is best for them when they feel confident in their application. And if that's, I'm going to go in the Peace Corps and then come home and take the MCAT and apply 4 cycles out, we are eager to still advise those students.
Great. And then how would you recommend those students go about staying in touch with their pre-health advisor and their program?
That probably varies a little bit with the student and the pre-health advisor, right? I think to me, it makes sense. I would coach my own, child or my niece or nephew, like definitely make sure you meet that person in person and, forge at least the foundation of a relationship and then check in with them periodically. You don't have to be in the same city as they are. They all have Zoom. Schedule a virtual meeting with them periodically and check in with them so that they know what you're up to and that you stay connected to them.
Great. So switching gears now to the MCAT, does WashU offer support for preparing for the MCAT?
We historically have had an MCAT prep course. We have paused that this year. The plan is to start it up again next academic year, so next fall. Right at the moment, for people who are getting ready to take the MCAT, this spring or at the end of the summer, there is not an existing in-house preparation platform.
And is there a certain time when you suggest students should take the MCAT?
That is so individual. It really depends on, the timeline of their coursework. It depends on their, the timeline of when they envision themselves applying. That is really a nuanced question for the student and their pre-health advisor to explore together.
Great. And then the last question for now about the MCAT. How long are the scores applicable when applying for medical school? They ask specifically, is it 5 years? Is it 10 years?
Yeah, at a lot of schools, it's 3 years.
Okay.
I just found out at UNC Chapel Hill, it's only 2. And a North Carolina resident and I were sort of looking at that together, and I was like, oh my gosh, it really is 2 years. That they are an outlier. So, I do think that points up that early on, it is wise for students to learn their state schools requirements. Whether you think today, especially for first-year students, whether you think today that you will end up at your state school, your goals could change. A lot of my first-year students come in saying they want to go to WashU Med, which is fine, and we send a lot of kids there from WashU undergrad to WashU Med. There's no doubt about that. But we have about 350 people a year applying to medical school. The size of the class at WashU Med is only 120. So clearly not everyone can go there. But the truth is not everyone wants to by the time they actually apply. Many students, as they have become, passionate about something specific within healthcare, realize that there are other institutions that actually provide them better opportunities. If you really want to do an MD PhD in neuroscience, arguably there's no better place that you could go than WashU Med. But there are a lot of other futures besides MD PhD in neuroscience. And while we do some of them very, very well, we don't do all of them the very best in the country. So I think it's important, it may be, depending on your career goals, that by the time you are looking at medical school and looking at debt management and looking at your career goals, your state school might be a really attractive option. And you don't want to end up not meeting the requirements at a school that's going to actually give you a preference in the admissions in most states. So learning your state school's requirements and, understanding their expectations early is just a smart call.
Great. Can you comment on recommended steps if a student is needing to recover from a significant GPA drop that occurred in a semester or two?
So first of all, I would say there's no academic mistake that will ever take medicine off the table. Like you cannot make an academic misstep that closes that door. Simply not possible. You can fail everything your first year, you can fail everything your second year, you still haven't closed the door to medicine. So if students are a little slower out of the gates, that is okay, because actually it's not a race. You don't have to be on the same timeline your suite mate is. I would say the student really should be in touch with a pre-health advisor, and we might even get that student assigned earlier if they really need help kind of like strategizing a timeline because of a little bit different start academically. That is a reason why we might assign an advisor earlier. So yes, I think, we'd want to strategize with them about what have you learned from your academic experiences so far? Where have you seen yourself grow as a scholar? What should you take, this next semester to best both set you up for success, but also to help you grow, but at a reasonable pace. So, I am not a marathon runner. I could perhaps run a marathon, but I would have to train. And if I tried to go out and run a 10-mile run on day one, I would just hurt myself. So, I think there's a similar analogy. If students have a lot of skill building to do, if they need to build their academic fitness, we need to start a training program that's going to be the right, incline ramp for them to both grow, but also be successful. And I think that our experienced advisors are really good at consulting on that. So have your student connect with an advisor and start developing a plan.
We now have a question about study abroad opportunities. Do you happen to know what kind of study abroad opportunities exist for pre-health students?
Yeah, I mean, pre-health students can any study abroad opportunity could be valued. So if they want to go to, King Carlos III in Spain and just study Spanish literature, there's nothing wrong with that. They will also get, a lot of interesting, cultural competency, and there's a lot of good things that will come from any study abroad experience. We do have some pre-health and especially pre-health health policy focused programs or community health focused programs. One is the Danish Institute for Study Abroad. The SIT program has some public health specific programs in South Africa and Switzerland. So yeah, there are a number of maybe I think there's one in London now too. But so yes, there are a number of locations that that have very plug and play programs where you can, sort of learn about global health policy. I also have students that just go to the country where they can practice the language that they want to really solidify if they're learning a second language. And then they just try to get involved once they're there, the same way they would on campus here, volunteering in some kind of clinical setting or, and they learn a lot through that too.
And just a little plug for our family webinar series. Our next webinar is actually going to be all about study abroad, and that's going to be Tuesday, March 7th at 5:30 if you want some additional information to what Carolyn just shared with us about study abroad. Okay, our next question is about family members who have a student that is an undecided major currently, but they do want to attend medical school. They know that. Do you have advice for how they could go about selecting a major?
Pick something you love. There's no major that helps. There is no major that hurts for medical school. You can major in Spanish, you can major in anthropology, you can major in economics. That's actually moderately popular. And I think the interest in health policy and health economics is driving some of that. So there's really no wrong major. Pick something you love because your grades are going to be better if you love what you're studying. And you will also seem like a more intellectually curious person that I would want to have in my medical school when I ask you about your educational experiences, if you're talking about coursework that you loved.
Wonderful. So then we have some more questions going back to the topic of shadowing, research, clinical experience. Is there a specific way that you recommend students go about recording and tracking their hours doing that?
That is a fabulous question. So you won't be required to prove how many hours you have. So there's no external validation required. That said, recording for yourself, whether that's a notes app on your phone or a little Moleskine, journal that you, tuck into your backpack and carry around with you, whatever method is going to be best for you to keep track of what you did, how long you spent doing it, and also a few, at least brief reflections about what happened. If you have all of that collated already, when you go to fill out your application, it will be so much less stressful. You will be confident about the hours you're reporting, and you won't feel insecure about, are they going to wonder if I really did this much? Am I estimating it right? Or am I going to get challenged on this? Because you'll know for yourself, you'll be confident. This is what I really did. But you'll also, even more important, are those little nuggets, even if it's just a phrase or, a couple of run-on sentences about something you observed that day. You'll be able to pluck that back out in a very, vibrant and compelling way as an anecdote for a personal statement or a most meaningful activities description or a secondary essay prompt. So I really, really, really recommend journaling. And there's not a magic way to journal. The best way to journal is the way that you'll actually do it.
So are there a certain number of hours you recommend that students shadow different physicians? I know you had kind of like your 300 broader
Yeah, I would
picture.
say, at least 30 to 50 hours observationally that, where you're in an environment with physicians. But that could overlap with other kinds of clinical experience. It depends on the roles, right? Depends on the setting.
And then more about research. Do you recommend students take fewer credits during the semester that they're going to focus on research?
Maybe that kind of depends on the student and the lab as well. Yeah, I think that's a really individual thing. Some of my students do research for credit and they will enroll in 12 units of other classes and 3 credits of research. And some of my students will get paid for research, take 15 regular credits and, do the equivalent of 3 research credits, but for pay instead. And I don't, that's like, which is going to be the better balance for you is a really personal thing.
Yeah. And then to follow up on that, do research credits that get completed for school, do those count towards medical school?
No, I mean, they wouldn't count toward, I mean, that's part of your undergraduate education. They would be part of your application to medical school. And they could certainly, especially if you're applying to either research intensive medical schools like WashU Med, or certainly if you're applying to an MD, PhD program, they would be an essential part of your medical school preparation. But your medical education is going to start when you start medical school.
Okay.
But if you are doing MD, PhD and you continue at the same institution, I can easily imagine that if you stay in the same lab, you get kind of a head start, right? You don't have to, you might be able to get the PhD part knocked out a little faster. It's possible.
And then the last question about research. Is there a certain time period, like a span of time that research normally takes?
No, I think that varies so much by discipline, like the kind of project you're on. It also depends on like the student, how much initiative they take, how, are they kind of following directions or are they, a little more of a self-starter on the project and kind of like looking to go further with things. And I think it depends a little bit, some of it is just luck.
Okay, now moving into some questions specific to acceptance into medical school. Do you know an approximate percentage of pre-med students at WashU that are accepted into medical school?
So our first time applicants for years were above 80%. We've seen a little bit of a dip right around the pandemic. We're still at 75%. Which since the number of applications has gone up nationally substantially, I'd say we're kind of holding our own. If you have more people applying and the same number of seats, fewer people will get in. That's just math, right? So I feel okay about that. I also think that might, we've been through obviously an extraordinarily disruptive time. And so I think we might sort of return to a norm in the next few years.
And then in your opinion, how does the medical school admissions process compare, I'm assuming in like difficulty, time requirement process with the undergraduate admission process?
Well, by the time you're applying to medical school, you're a much more mature individual. So I think it is much more difficult, but you're also much more ready for it.
Now we have some questions specific to Org 1 and Org 2, I'm assuming organic chemistry. When should students take Org 1 and Org 2?
So it depends on when you've taken Gen Chem, not before you've taken Gen Chem. So, it's fine to start I have students who don't know they even want to be pre-med until they're juniors in college. And then they're like, I took a biology class and this is so cool. I think I might want to do this. And they start taking chemistry in their junior or even senior year. Well, obviously they're not going to complete all their pre-med requirements before they graduate. That's fine. They can finish them up in a post-bac program, and that could either be a formal post-bac program, and we even have one here, or that could be a DIY at home, an inexpensive state school option. So the basic required courses are offered everywhere, and you can do them on whatever schedule is best for you. In terms of for students who have already started have finished general chemistry, when should they then take organic? I think it depends on what else they've got going on and whether they like chemistry and whether they expect to like organic chemistry. So I think that's really a pretty nuanced individual decision, but I'm happy to talk to students about it and give them my take on pros and cons of different options.
We had some parents and family members specifically ask for your view on students taking organic chemistry over the summer outside of WashU. Do you have a perspective on that?
I think it is fine. I know that there's a lot of stuff in the water out there about, oh, it looks bad. I mean, I think there's 100 things. A holistic review is very real in medical school admissions these days. So I think there's actually like 100 things that they're looking at, and where and when you took your organic chemistry is probably not even number 99. So I just don't think it's as big. It's just not a high stakes decision. I think in framing, if somebody asked you in an interview, why did you take organic in the summer? If you were like, oh my gosh, organic at my school is so hard, I really didn't want to do that. Like, that's not what medical schools want to hear, right? They want people who embrace challenges and who are excited for, growing through challenging experiences, because medical school will be a challenging experience. But I think if your rationale is like, I really wanted to carve out I wanted to start research in my sophomore year, and that organic lab is half a day. And there was just no way to get into a lab if I, was taking it during the school year, or I wanted to make sure I could study abroad my junior year. So I just had to move one of those science sequences to the summer to free up a semester in my junior year to be out of the country. I think there's lots of, or I, was really trying to set myself up to apply for the Civic Scholars Program. So I wanted to have a really substantial community engagement during my sophomore year that would make me competitive for that. I think there's lots of good reasons that are, as long as they're true. Like, if it's also because you didn't want to take organic at WashU, maybe that's fine, but you just don't want, like, I was afraid of it to be your only reason.
And then we had a student pre-submit a question about they plan to take Org 1 and Org 2 this summer at WashU. Mm-hmm. And then they asked, how will that change my GPA? Will the new scores remove my old scores? So my assumption is that they're retaking those classes over the summer.
So for the purposes of like WashU, like Latin honors, or, your departmental GPA, or a minimum GPA you need to like apply to a sorority or study abroad or something like that, your summer coursework does replace your grades on your WashU transcript. So assuming you do better, your GPA is going to go up. When you go to apply to medical school, if that is the end goal, you will have to enter all coursework taken, and that includes both times that you took organic, and they won't be weighted any differently. So retaking organic doesn't change your GPA any more than just taking a different 8 credits would have.
Thank you. So we've spoken a lot about medical school tonight. We do have a parent or family member whose student wants to go specifically into physical therapy.
Awesome.
So what kinds of courses related to kinesiology, nutrition, movement, etc., are offered currently? And do you know if there's any plans to expand what's offered for those career paths related to physical therapy?
So I will say that a fair number of my students who are eventually pursue physical therapy, I would say they either work in, and by work, that's not necessarily for pay, right? They either work or volunteer in settings where movement is important. So there's a swim class over at the School of Medicine for kids with like muscular dystrophy and other kinds of like, movement disorders. And so if you're confident in the water and you're excited to, work with people with, these kinds of issues, that might be a great place to get experience, right? There's also a dance class at the med school for the elderly, for Parkinson's patients specifically. And there is some pretty strong evidence that like dance therapy actually helps Parkinson's patients. So they have some dance classes and they love, but you can't really pair two Parkinson's patients. So you need a stable person without any movement limitations or tremors to be your dance partners. So there's some need for, undergrads or other community members to be dance partners for Parkinson's patients. So there are things like that that are experiential, that are available. Some of my students choose to work with the athletic training program. And if they are athletes themselves, and that's partly why they're interested in physical therapy, because they've already had physical therapy because of injuries or whatnot, that could, that can be an option. I have a fair number of students who eventually pursue physical therapy who probably also maybe got physical therapy for their own injuries because of their athleticism through dance. So dance can be a great major for that, or at least some dance experience. In terms of specific kinesiology courses, we do have a nutrition course. In terms of specific kinesiology courses, that's really not something we do here in arts and sciences. I think if students want to pursue things like that at their state school over the summer that might have broader offerings at the professional schools, that could be, interesting to them, and it could be great. It is not required for a strong physical therapy application, at least not at our School of Medicine.
Great, thank you. Can you now speak a little bit about student athletes who are pursuing medical school? Do you notice that they have any difficulties completing the pre-med requirements while also competing in a varsity sport?
So I have plenty of students who've gone to medical school who played a varsity sport all 4 years. I'm thinking of a half a dozen who are, in medical school right now, who were, very dedicated to their sport, captains of their teams, very high performing, both academically and athletically. And that worked out perfectly for them. I also work with students every year who at some point in their academic journey, and it seems like sophomore year is a common time, but it could be at any point, they really start reevaluating. I love my sport, but there's a lot of things I want to do. And maybe all the time I'm putting into practice, I might want to do more in the community or have more time for research, or I might really, want to get a clinical job because I'm pretty much doing a half-time job at my sport right now, especially for a swimmer, heavens. So, I think it can go either way. There's certainly plenty of role models of students who've stayed with their varsity athletic commitment and been very, very successful. But I think students who, this is a D3 school. You are not going to give up a scholarship if you leave the team. So you might give up some community connections, or you might be afraid you're going to lose some community connections. But I also think that people here do understand that this is not a professional route. Athletics is a side gig here.
So we had a question about sophomores entering their junior year, and if there's specific steps or things you recommend that they do over the summer to prepare for their career in medicine.
If they're already in a research lab and they want to stay here and do research, I think that's terrific. Or if they are approaching labs and want to start in, stay here and start in a research lab over the summer, that is a fairly common thing to do summer after sophomore year. But it's absolutely not required. I also think it's fine to either stay here or go home And you can never have too much community service, and you can never have too much clinical experience. So if you want to focus your sophomore summer on those elements, and that might be easier to access at home than it is even here.
So we had some follow-up questions in the Q&A feature about pre-health advisors after you were giving lots of good information on that earlier. Can you kind of tell us just some quick highlights? What are some things that pre-health advisors can help students with?
I think my team is prepared to help students with everything from, I'm floundering a little bit academically, help me plan for, what resources should I be accessing, or, some advice on studying, some advice on how to sequence courses, to, how am I progressing in terms of the non-academic components of my eventual application, helping assess their progress on the AAMC's competencies. There are 15 pre-medical competencies that medical schools are all in one way or another scoring in the application process. And so I think that pre-health advisors are adept and experienced at helping students self-assess in those competencies. I also think that my team is a great sounding board. I've plenty of students who are very sure this is what they want to do. They still need to get plenty of clinical experience so that they have recent concrete evidence that they've tested and confirmed that decision. But I also have students who are like, I don't really know. Medicine is a long road. 4 more years of school, and then 5 years of residency. And then I still have to figure out like where I'm working, and I'm going to be, I'm going to have kind of like weirdly still be like the new person, 10 years from now. Like, I don't know if that's right for me. And so I do think we also can help with values clarification around, is this really the direction I want to go?
Great, thank you. In addition to that, can they also help advise students in determining how many like part-time work hours, if we're talking like non-med, just like working during school, how many part-time work hours they can balance with their pre-med school and requirements?
Yeah, I think that's a very nuanced and individual kind of, like really, I can only decide for myself, like if I'm gonna do a great job at my job. And I have this, community service thing that I do. I'm pretty involved with the Prison Education Project. And I'm, trying to, take a class, and I'm trying to learn a new hobby. Like, I'm the only one that can really figure out if all those things are actually going to work out for me and make me happy. But I think talking to somebody more experienced and having a more, an experienced advisor as a sounding board while a young person figures out what is right for them can be really useful.
Thank you. So we had some parents and family members who are curious if WashU is going to be providing mock medical school interviews this semester for pre-med students.
Yeah, we do every semester.
Great. Then we had another question going back to gap year students. Do you recommend a gap year? Is that something that you see often? Just kind of any general feedback on that?
It is definitely something I see often, and I would never recommend against it. So if students don't feel they need a gap year, and especially if their pre-health advisor concurs with them that they don't need a gap year, I'm certainly not pushing for it. It may not be necessary, and it may not feel beneficial to the student if it's really not necessary, and that's fine. But only 20% of my students are attempting to go straight through. So lots of people are taking gap years.
Okay.
And 20% is especially, low. And that is data that, I've gotten out of the last couple of cycles, which is also pandemic impacted. People really had trouble volunteering, getting any kind of clinical experience. I had a lot more students like just right out of, the first time I even talked to them saying, I think I'm going to need 2 gap years because I don't have anything to put on my application. And so I need to work and volunteer for a year after I graduate, and then I'll apply. And I'm like, good planning. That is really insightful. And I'm really glad I didn't even have to tell you that. So I do think that that also is going to drift back to where we have more students, definitely taking 1 gap year and a few more going straight through. But we're always going to, I think from here on out, it's always going to be more than half of my students will take at least 1 gap year, because it's just too much to get done in 2 summers and 6 semesters. Because you have to be, if you're going to go straight through, you have to do everything that needs to get done by June after your junior year. So the rest of that summer doesn't even part of your application.
We had a question kind of related to something you just mentioned about the pandemic and how that had an impact on people's ability to do kind of the traditional internships, in-person shadowing, et cetera. So I heard you say some students are taking gap years in order to kind of make up some of those missed opportunities. But did you notice, do medical schools kind of like understand some of the challenges students faced with that? Is there some added flexibility there? Or are you seeing people kind of needing to take gap years if that impacted them?
I sure wish I could say yes. Because it feels so unfair, right? I mean, not that, obviously people lost their lives. So not that the loss of a year for a young person is the worst thing that happened out of the pandemic, but it is still another loss. And there were so many of them. So it is difficult for me to say, but the truth is, what I observe is, I was really hoping in the summer of 2020 in particular that, medical school admissions would obviously take that into account. And that's not what I saw. I saw a lot of people with otherwise fabulous applications who were just kind of thin on experiences getting waitlisted.
Okay, so I know we're kind of getting close to our end time here at 6:29. So I'm gonna just ask one last question for this evening. And Carolyn, again, thank you for your information that you've shared tonight. So what is just kind of your the last minute of this webinar advice for students to stand out in their medical school application?
I think so. What medical schools are really looking for is sort of longevity and depth of commitment to something that is outward directed. So some kind of community engagement or service, like increasing your level of commitment or taking on some leadership or taking classes that are related to the community engagement that you're doing, like somehow expanding your commitment to community engagement, I think is really important, or can really enhance the narrative that you provide when you're headed to med school. So as much as like those clinical hours are really important, I think in terms of telling a story, you want to have, and certainly first year students do not have to worry about like, are all my activities adding up to a story yet? Like, it's fine to try a bunch of stuff and see what, really is a great fit for you. That's a perfectly developmentally appropriate approach. But as you're going on in school, you should, not be dabbling so much and, pick some things to really commit to and then make a difference there in some way. And then you've got a story to tell that I think really helps in the application process.
Great, thank you. So Carolyn, thank you again. Families, we hope you learned some valuable information this evening. We know we did not get to all of the questions that were submitted. So if you have a remaining question, if it was not answered tonight, please feel free to reach out to Carolyn directly in the email that was just shared in the chat. Or you can also email transitions@wustl.edu, and then we'll get you that answer or connect you to Carolyn. So as a reminder, this webinar recording is going to be shared at families.wustl.edu next week. Stay tuned for our next webinar, a conversation about study abroad, occurring on Tuesday, March 7th at 5:30. You'll be able to register at that same website, families.wustl.edu. And we'll see you then. Hope you all have a good rest of your night. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, bye.